My name's Roxanne Anderson. I like the pronouns they and them, and I do a lot of things. I would say I'm somebody who wears several different hats in community, and most of those are about creating safer space for queer LGBT folks of color. And so, organizationally, I'm connected to the Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition, where I help run the shot clinic and keep that organization kind of in line with its mission. I'm also the co-founding director of Rare Productions, which is an art and entertainment production company. And I work through organizations in board work. So I'm part of the Southside Harm Reduction Board. I'm on the board of POC Pride, and I engage in my community in, I don't know, multiple ways. I'm hoping to fashion all of those amazing kind of hats that I wear into a fashionable fedora that kind of goes for everything, with kind of the venture that I've been spending the most time on, which is Our Space, an LGBT community center. I think one of my early inspirations just left this chair, and that's Nick Metcalf. And Nick really gave me a way to plug into community, to find my own niche, and to really dream. Dreaming was encouraged as part of our work. And so the ability to kind of plug in multiple places and network with community was also really encouraged, relationship building. And so I would say that Nick was, a mentor, an inspiration. And then I think, just looking in our history, we have so many phenomenal folks, you know the list, right? We have Sylvia and we have Marcia and we have all these amazing folks. We have folks that weren't out who did amazing work inside of other entities, inside of the civil rights movement, inside of the labor rights movement. And so we just have this rich history of LGBT folks. And it feels like not super fair to isolate them, because I think many of them have informed the ways in which I do stuff, the ways in which I engage in community. But I would say, locally, who are those folks? Nick Metcalf, Lee Combs was somebody who held a lot of doors, still is a person who encourages me and cheers me on. Beth Zimsky. There's also a really long list here. Howard Ellis, folks that I'm sure you've already heard the names of in this process of interviewing, queer Minneapolites. The first prides that I went to were probably under the organization Minnesota Men of Color, or in conjunction with POC Pride and Women of Color Building Project. But I think the first kind of like official Pride I went to was when I worked at Minnesota Men of Color. And I think the thing that stands out to me was the number of LGBT folks of color and kind of the time in between the head nod. And what I mean by that is it's pretty customary for communities of color, across communities of color, to kind of give a head nod when we see each other in a more white space. And so, those head nods were kind of like far between. Recognizing and seeing other people of color wasn't something that was happening kind of every other person. And so it was sparse, I will say. I think that's a pretty good word for it. And so, I think that's a memorable thing. I think the other thing that stands out is just kind of feeling isolated, even though we were with other people of color in kind of our area, in our tent. People of color were coming up to us and interacting with us. It still felt a little isolating from the larger context of Pride. The next year, I think probably was the second official year. That year really stands out to me because I was definitely working at Minnesota Men of Color, and we were stationed by a stage. I don't know if it was the Stonewall stage or the Rainbow stage. It was a drag stage at that time. And, there were numbers happening. And in the middle of a number, it just kind of like the record just kind of skipped and then it got silent. And that person that was performing was a trans woman of color who was asked to leave the stage. And she was asked to leave the stage because whoever the stage manager was didn't like her performance, didn't like her show, didn't like her. I don't know why, but she got asked to leave the stage. And I was tabling with Minnesota Men of Color, and our kind of draw to get people to come and interact with us was a giant phallus. And the interactive piece was kind of a quarter toss into these little tiny shot glasses, also with penises in them. And so we did that kind of quarter game to be interactive, and she came just running, crying to us by the time she got to our area. Her makeup was streaked, and she had a demand, and that demand was, we need to do something about this. And the complaint was that it happened frequently, that trans and genderqueer, those weren't really terminologies that we used then. Drag queens were getting less time on stage. They were getting less money. They were getting kind of less promotion. And she wanted us as an agency representing people of color to create something different in the park for people of color. And so right after that Pride, we went back and we did our debrief. And Nick said, what do you want to do? Dream. And we said, we want to have the biggest area in the park. We want it to be really easy for people of color to find us. We want to be kind of a beacon for other queer folks of color. And so we did that, and he created the platform for us to do that by going to the Twin Cities Pride meetings. And those were difficult, and they were hard, and it was full of racism and misogyny. And it wasn't that people were intending to be mean. It was just that people weren't trying to have an understanding of the cultural dynamics that we wanted to present at Pride. And so that next year we had the Power to the People area, and we worked really hard to get performers of color and other organizations that serve people of color, like Clues and the Urban League, to table with us. And so I think we had something like 24 organizations and 2 days of music by performers of color. And that was, last year was our official 20-year anniversary and celebration of the Power to the People area. And so I think from that kind of isolation grew this amazing space. Now we have one of the biggest areas at Pride. We take up a whole corner of the park. We have a whole area that's blue on the map that says this is a place for people of color. And we try to have food vendors and other cultural organizations that serve people of color. And then, of course, artists serving people of color, all kinds of fierceness on the stage all day long. Some of the things that have changed, I think, over the last after the last many years, really, it's 20 years, is that, Twin Cities Pride has really taken a different approach. They've had some DEI training, they've incorporated people of color on the board. They've listened to us in a different way. Part of that is because Nick pushed and he insisted and he, made us sit at the table when the draw was to kind of sit in the back of the room, and so we took up space, and from that taking up space, I think, Twin Cities Pride really recognized that Pride is also a vital place for people of color. People of color need that space and need to interact and actually want to. So they've done some work. They've incorporated people of color on their Pride board and in their committee work. They've listened to us as people of color artists and, us managing the Power to the People stage. And I've really seen a change in the last few years. The new director really gets it. He's really engaged in community community. He's really kind of setting a tone differently than I've ever experienced working with them over the last 20 years. And so I'm really excited about what's going to be happening kind of inside the framework of the festival, and also this work that they're doing outwardly through the year with the Rainbow Circle and other kind of initiatives about trans lives. I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people to be included. To me, what it means is relationships. It's all about relationship building for me. And so I feel more included if I go to an event and there's even just one person that I know or recognize, then I have a place to kind of start. But I think that piece about relationships is really vital. So I think, when we think about diversity and inclusion, it's not really about taking a course or attending a workshop. It's really about building those relationships. How many people of color are in your phone? How many people of color are in your recent contacts? How many conversations have you had with people of color? How many people of color come to your home and interact with you and you go to their home? Because this is actual relationship. I'm not talking about how many Facebook friends you have, right? It's like, who are the people of color that you show up for and that will show up for you? And that's, I think, the part about, diversity and learning that really does stuff to counter racism and white supremacy and other forms of oppression. Oh, the things that I've learned about the intersection of queerness and culture or people of color is that we have a long way to go, that the intersection is really wide, and there's a lot of distractions at this intersection, and there's a lot of feelings at this intersection. And so I think what I've really learned goes back to that former question about relationships. This is the place where you ground, right? This is a place where you learn, you ask questions, you get corrected, you get called in, sometimes you get called out. I think the thing that's really important about that intersection is not canceling folks when they mess up, and giving them other spaces to learn, giving them other directions to kind of focus in on. Because I think a lot of times our feelings get hurt in that intersection, and then we don't kind of know how to go back to it. It's scary. We don't want to get crashed again. And so we just kind of avoid it. We go around the block instead of going back to that intersection. And so we're like, oh yeah, I know about that intersection over there. Yeah, I know about it, but I'm not going there. And so I think it's really kind of important to go back, build relationships, start with something small, learn, read, challenge yourself, right? Do things that are uncomfortable. Show up to an event where you might be the only white person in the room. Acknowledge when you see the only brown person in the room. Go up to them, make a connection, make them feel comfortable and welcome. And that's not in a tokenizing kind of way. That's in a recognition of, we're humans. I wonder if this person might feel out of place because I don't see anybody else that looks like them in this space. And I would say that works in our community also for gender expression. If you see somebody having a hard time navigating the bathroom, step up. Maybe hold the bathroom for them so nobody else is coming in or out. There are lots of ways that we can kind of step into that intersection cautiously. And I think the important thing is to keep approaching it, keep trying, keep looking for ways where it's safe for you to cross and to get out there and figure out where your spot is. Oh, prominent members of the queer BIPOC community. Well, I think prominency is relative, right? But I think that there are some important folks that we need to keep thinking of and keep remembering. Sharon Day, Of course, Nick, Dennis Anderson, who runs the POC Pride organization, my partner, Anna Meyer, who does a lot of stuff around helping hold that space and create space for BIPOC folks and the healing that goes with that. Baki is a young, upcoming artist. Quinn Via Gomez, is an amazing broadcast journalist. She also goes by Shimmer. We do a show together, and she's an out, fierce Latinx trans person who creates safe spaces for people to work in. She's an HR person, and so she gets queer trans folks jobs. There's just a broad list of those folks. And, there's Charlene Leach, who works at the African American AIDS Task Force and has really been a central part of many organizations, including the National Youth Advocacy Coalition, which used to partner and connect with District 202. I'm just like the list, I'm trying to filter through the list. Howard Ellis is another amazing elder in our community who's done so many things. President Andrea Jenkins, who has created so many policies and so many things that sometimes we just take for granted. This weekend, my car got towed. Like many cars got towed because of street cleaning. And I walked into the service building, the impound lot. Nobody likes to go there. You got to pay a lot of money. But when I walked in, immediately I saw the gender neutral, the unisex, the single stall bathroom. And I know that that's a direct result of her work. And the policy that we now have in Minneapolis that says any new city build will have a single stall bathroom. That's important for us. It's vital for our community. It's an essential right to be able to go to the bathroom and feel safe, right? And those are some of the things that we just take for granted. There are so many people on that Trans Equity Council who've done amazing stuff for our community and city. Jason Jackson, who's done a lot to create space, Yang, and there's just, the list just keeps going on, and I could probably sit here for hours listing off queer, trans, BIPOC, people of color who have really been instrumental in ensuring that we have a path forward to liberation. Yeah, I didn't really talk too much about the Two-Spirit Society because I'm guessing Nick probably did. But, I would say that they've done a lot of work and they've had many iterations in our community. And some of those leaders are Mo Mike and Jay Rowe. And there's just, Miss Riva. There's many Two-Spirit leaders who have done some amazing work in our community. Reverend Lawrence, Enzi. There's just so many folks that have made this vital impact in our community. I wish I could just list them all because, they all deserve flowers, and many of those folks don't get a lot of recognition. They don't get an opportunity to sit here in front of the camera. So I'm going to try to lift up as many of those folks as I can. The Twin Cities needs an LGBT community center. We don't have one. We're one of only 3 states in the whole United States that doesn't have a formalized LGBT community. And I think we have amazing organizations and they all do this really great work. Some of it's siloed, some of it crosses over with other work. And if we just had a space where everybody could be in the same kind of sphere. Many of these organizations are paying rent. They're not paying rent to landlords who care about us. We don't have any kind of equity. And so just the investment in ourselves in something like Our Space, which is this initiative to create an LGBT center that's informed by community. We've been doing research over the last 5 years for it. I think it's vital for us, especially as we have this influx of trans folks and trans families, now that we have this kind of refugee status for trans folks. And so I think it's really vital for us to kind of come together as a community, come together as organizations, pool our resources and invest in ourselves so that we can have some stabilization across our community. Arts are vital to our community. Like, we thrive in the arts. We start trends. All the trends queer folks have started. We haven't always gotten paid for them. We haven't always gotten to claim them. Often we don't get to claim them till way after the fact, or get recognition of that till way after the fact. We're just kind of now getting recognition that, maybe Madonna took some things from the ball culture when she made this great thing called Vogue, right? And so I think it's really important for us to make sure that art is infused in all the things, especially in an LGBT community center. I want queer art on the walls. I want queer art performances. I want queer artists working as baristas, as the show director when they get done with their barista shift. I want all of that interaction in one really cool, really pretty, really radical space.